You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Get bellyache. I got a duty right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. This is UrzaMaster. With me, as always, Lord Uther, Pendragon, and today joining us, Lucas Bly. Get the ball away and puke.
What position, Coach? Anyway, hello, gentlemen.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Welcome, fellas. Welcome. This is the 25th episode of the Warp Core Podcast. Congratulations, fellas. We have made it. And with that, we have made it to episode 6, season 2, Strange New Worlds. But let's take a moment and appreciate, here in our quarter-century episode, a few of the moments that made us special. One, of course, the famous Lucas Bly, our on-again recurring guest / host / just part of the show. And of course, we've gone boldly through all of the original series movies, all of the Next Generation movies, and now into brave frontiers, I would add. Strange New Worlds. Easily, I believe, the best streaming series. All loved Picard, which we also talked about, but easily the best streaming series out there right now. I feel that there is nothing greater. And the longer this SAG-AFTRA strike goes on, we might not see another streaming series anytime soon. So, if you're just joining the Warp Core Podcast, you're just starting out Strange New Worlds, definitely worth your time on both fronts. And we are, of course, appreciated by the Lord Uther, the millions.
Sorry, I was muted. And millions.
One day we'll get our jokes in time and we'll have something original,
we'll get there.
instead of copying The Rock and Joe Rogan. But we've got a lot to talk about with this episode. We've had a lot to talk about the last few episodes. But before we get started, as we did last time, I just want to give a quick shout out to our brothers and sisters and non-binary friends in SAG-AFTRA. We stand with you as content creators. We're not union members, but certainly respect the ongoing strike and hope that you all get paid for the lovely work you're doing, because my goodness, Strange New Worlds and other Star Trek errata we've seen lately has been just incredible. Not to mention a lot of the streaming material that's out there right now is absolutely fantastic. And truly, a lot of the material you're seeing coming out of Hollywood has been great. So with that, I want to get us our usual background run with Lucas Bly today. Lucas, why don't you give us a rundown of what we've got going on in episode 6?
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther. Thanks to you at home. And I also, too, would like to shout out to our fellow brothers, sisters, family, and friends in SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild of America who are working the picket lines, striving for a fair deal. And we hope that you're back to work real soon and we get brand new episodes like Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Episode 6. Lost in Translation was the title of this week's episode. Also, unrelated, a terrific Sofia Coppola film from 2003 starring Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray. Check it out, but you will not get Star Trek vibes from that one. It's a very Japanese-centered mediation on loneliness and what is my place in the culture. So this one was directed by Dan Liu. It was written by Onitra Johnson and David Reed. They are both expert Strange New World contributors. Last season, Miss Johnson co-wrote episode 8 of season 1, The Elysian Kingdom, and in that episode was when Dr. Mabenga, whilst in a nebula, found himself in a medieval battle on the decks of the Enterprise for his daughter. So that was from the pen/keyboard of Miss Johnson. David Reed was a solo writer on the season 2, episode 3, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which was when Lon and an alternate reality Jim Kirk were running around 21st century Canada, Toronto, to try and stave off an apocalyptic event. And when we ran into Pelia, our now chief engineer. So there were lots of connections there. So it made sense to bring David back, because this episode does feature Pelia and Jim Kirk, and we'll get to more of the Jim Kirk angle shortly. I want to talk, I kind of want to set the stage for this episode in our discussion by talking about writing, but I don't want to talk about the obvious planks of writing. And there are at least 3 if you're going to be successful in entertainment or drama or anything like that. When we discuss writing, oftentimes, the first thing people think about is the dialogue, the actual words spoken in a movie or a TV show or what have you. And I mean, that's, the very surfacey level one. Then you have what actually takes place in the story. In Game of Thrones, the famous red wedding scene, and you can pick all of your favorite moments from Marvel movies and series and so forth. The actual plot events, surprises, revelations, betrayals, double crosses, triumphs, tragedies. So the plotting is sort of a second level. But the third level, and the one that really stands out in tonight's episode, it's invisible writing. And that is to say, is how is your hour of television or your 2-hour movie, how is it constructed in such a way that you don't notice how elegant the foundation and architecture of the story is? You're so caught up in the events, and you are brought along from scene by scene without being wrenched out and saying, oh, this is slowing things down, or oh, what's that doing in here? Or oh, that doesn't feel organic to the story that I'm being told. And I want to say that this episode, written by Johnson and Reed, it was very nimble, in so much as that we had a main storyline of Uhura, who's hearing things and being plagued by terrifying hallucinations, a zombie Hemmer with pretty good zombie makeup, I might add, and corridors of dead Enterprise crewmen. And she's fighting herself at one point in a vicious blade, and she ends up breaking Jim Kirk's nose, but he doesn't write her up for insubordination. So we have a main storyline that we have to sort of take care of. What's going on with Uhura? Why is she hearing this? What's the message, the secret message that only she can decipher? Plus plenty of shots of her moving through a corridor with a flashlight and a phaser out, looking all the while like Dana Scully, going down a dark hallway in the X-Files. So that's the service. We have to tell that A storyline. And the A storyline in this episode is terrific. The eventual revelation that these messages are an alien species that is being harmed by the Federation and the Enterprise's mining of their deuterium in the nebula, and subsequently having to abandon those efforts, I'm sure at no small cost to Starfleet. That's a great, sort of A storyline. And a lot of your attention and energy would be focused on how that plays out. It plays out very well. There are twists and reversals and reveals. But we also check in on other characters, and more importantly, we check in on other characters whose arcs have been slowly developing this second season. And it's something that we talked about last week, like taking, for example, Spock and Christine Chapel. We said we wanted to see a relationship develop, we wanted to see it bloom, but we didn't want to have it so upfront that we were feeling bombarded by it, or that it seemed like it was taking away from potentially other parts of the show to explore. And in this one, they're playing, multi-dimensional chess, a callback for many Star Trek fans. And they're doing so with a snappy banter and also some understated and baldly stated attraction. Where is this going? What do we think? Where are we boyfriend, girlfriend kind of, vibes? And it's great. I mean, the scene itself probably takes no more than 2 or 3 minutes. It's well placed within the episode to not take away from some of the later action that we need to wrap things up. And so this was how you can use brevity and economy and still get, advance the characters and the emotions and so forth further down the road, so that when we get to a big pent up climax at the end of the second season and on to the third, we feel like there's growth. We feel like this story isn't just a hamster wheel on a treadmill, just going in the same direction, and we're just repeating the same stuff. So we get a Spock Chapel scene in here that's terrific. We get a whole relationship with Jim and Sam Kirk, his brother, which we'll go into more as when we're just talking about Jim. We have a nice threaded through the episode relationship with Uhura and Jim, which we'll get into more. Again, Jim Kirk's going to be a big focal point of this here. We check back in briefly with Lon and Jim. She fell for alternate reality Kirk, and then was told you can never talk about anything that happened, and he doesn't remember it, and even if you have a massive crush on him, you're just going to have to swallow it and go attention to duty. And who amongst us who wasn't in high school hasn't had to, swallow a crush from afar? So we had to check in with that. We had a storyline developing with Una and Pelia as they were leading the repair and management team on the Federation, deuterium collector. So the point being, you have, 5 or 6 little threads that you're expertly stitched into the main storyline of Uhura, being driven mad by these audio transmissions that only she can hear. And like I say, a bad writer or someone who's not as well versed in their craft, that's very easy to derail. It's very easy to get those moments wrong. And I think if we're going to celebrate writing as we do on this show and consistently praise their efforts, I'd like to call attention to the fact that this episode, and this episode above even any of the others we've seen this season so far, was just like so well constructed. The foundation was laid, every brick was set in a place that could make you feeling we're going forward. It left us more path, more runway to further explore as we move on, deeper into the season and deeper into the show. And, actors, they love to have those spotlight episodes. This clearly, again, was sort of a Uhura forward episode. But if you can give Una, those moments, or you can give, Lon and Jim, that sort of like thing, just reminding people. It's not even a placeholder so much, it's just reminding him, hey, there's something there, and she really wants to tell him, but to do so, she'd get into a lot of trouble. I have no doubt that that's going to pay off somewhere in the not too distant future. If not this season, then certainly in a season or two to come. That plot line will not lay dormant. And that's good, because we as viewers can get excited and look forward to that, emotional confrontation or revelation or how that's going to play out. That's something we can anticipate and get excited for. So I thought personally, if, talking about high watermarks for writing and so forth, I'm not necessarily going to shout this one out for its dialogue or the plotting so much. It's just that I thought that this was a 4-course meal, appetizers and dessert included, that gave Star Trek fans, it rewarded fans, right? We said last week that was a great episode that you could just watch, come in off the street, sit down on your couch and enjoy it. I think this was a reward to people that have enjoyed Strange New Worlds from, maybe all the way back to Discovery Season 2 when several of the cast members were first introduced. So I feel like, this was something sort of like a great to the fans, like, hey guys, we know exactly where we're going, trust the process, and there's going to be some big payoffs here, within the next 4 episodes that we have left, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, that was my thing on writing, and I'm sure you guys have your thoughts on that. But I I think the where I think a good discussion point really launches off to was Jim Kirk, and I think Lord Uther and Ursa have referred to it off camera. This was the first episode in the series where we got the Jim Kirk, the authentic Jim Kirk. You will remember he was first introduced to us as a alternate timeline Kirk when Captain Pike had to see, what the result of his decision might be if he didn't embrace his fate. So that Jim Kirk doesn't exist. And then in episode 3, again written by David Reed, we had alternate Kirk running around with Lon and stealing her heart. And that Jim Kirk doesn't exist. But this is it. This is the real McCoy, not Bones. But this is Jim Kirk through and through, coming onto the Enterprise presumably from one of his first visits. He even looks around the transporter room and says, "Man, what a great ship!" Or, he pays high praise, and he hasn't even left the transporter room yet. So I want to talk about Jim. I want to talk about your impressions of him as we see more and more of him. I want to talk about his relationship, which again, in just a few short strokes, is sketched out for us with Sam throughout this episode. So I kind of want to start with Kirk, who will eventually take the helm, as we know. I mentioned to Lord Uther my one problem with Paul Wesley's performance, and this is a quibble. This is not a tribble. It's just more of something there. I don't quite respond yet to his voice. And that is to say that I think when, the actor or the character, I feel like it's like a quarter register higher in my imagination than like William Shatner delivering lines or Chris Pine or, and I know that's silly, but it's like, and I know that they're probably doing that to show that he's green and he's still just a lieutenant and he's, he's not the Kirk. He hasn't grown into that Kirk yet. But I think that's why I'm having a hard time giving him a bear hug, just because the idea of a Kirk, who is seasoned and who faced down the Kobayashi Maru and did all that dangerous stuff. Like I'm still reconciling the two. And so I want to get your guys' impression. Again, we talked about him in episode 3 of this season when he was with Lon. But again, I think this one even gives him more ground to play with. So I don't know, Uther, you want to sound off on one of your heroes in yellow?
I always default to Urza, but do you mind if I go first, Urza? They did an interview with Paul Wesley, right? That's his name?
I believe so.
They did an interview. They did an interview with him, and he said that he's purposefully tempering himself down. To your point there, Lucas.
Thank you.
To be a little greener, in that sense. I see your point though, because I think we've all talked about how we've latched on to Spock, right? Like that's Spock, that's Uhura. We've latched on to those people. It's very believable. He's growing on me as Kirk, and this episode, in my opinion, helped because we're getting a proper timeline Kirk for better. I mean, it's happening when it should be happening. It's not one of these time travels or whatever. I like that he wanted to go have a drink. He was talking about that. His relationship with Sam. I don't want to jump to the end. We'll wait on that. His bond that he starts forming with Uhura, which to me plays into the original series. So I think we're seeing a lot of great things there. So he's growing on me a little bit. Shatner is just so iconic. I think people are probably just, but so is Nimoy, and Ethan Peck is nailing it. So yeah. I'm gonna say right now, I get it. To your point about the writing, which we've all talked about, and I even sent a message about it. This episode is like, it's like you're going along and you're picking up the breadcrumbs that have been left behind, and it's leading us somewhere. Every scene has purpose. Every scene has purpose. And that's what I've loved about this show from the first season up until now. Every scene has had purpose and attention to detail in everything they do. They're in that writing room, obviously, with everything sketched out with where they've gone, where they are, and where they're going to go. And I it's just so incredibly important because a lot of shows don't do that. Now, maybe it's because of the shortened time with the season that they've got to be that detailed. I think they're just amazing writers. I think that has something to do with it too. And now I need my glasses because I'm an old man and I wrote something very small. Kind of like Kirk from Wrath of Khan. Anyway.
Nice.
They capitalize on every second, right? I mean, which I know I just kind of brought that up. But here's the thing. Even though they went along and they were picking up all the breadcrumbs, you weren't being beat over the head with anything in terms of like, oh, look at what we just did here. You know where this is going to go. No. Casual mention of this is a jumping off point for the Gorn, right? The interactions with Uhura. Even the...
You
said
mentioned the Pelia Una storyline in your message.
Yeah. So even though it looks like, oh, maybe that was just a little side thing that's happening, it's obviously... This writing staff is too good. It's setting something up for down the line. Something's going to happen that relationship is going to come into play. One other little thing before I turn it over to the amazing UrzaMaster. I loved the array that they had up to collect all the dilithium or durithium or whatever they called it. Because it looked like the solar array from Insurrection. And I almost felt like that was kind of done on purpose. And
or the Tron Solar Sailor, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely loved that they did that. And here's the other thing, too. Sorry, this just came to my mind. We had all these threads weaving along, and we still had an exploration story where here are these people, we can't, you can't hear them, or they can only communicate a certain way, but we still had a story in the long run about exploration. And I absolutely love it. Loved it. I'll stop now. Urza?
I mean, yes. To steal a Lord Uther line. Where do you begin, right? I think starting with the writing, the foundation of this episode, I mean, it's why it unfolded in such a beautiful and loving way. This was the hour-long episode of Star Trek that we might have gotten in the original series, with all of the characters getting looped in at one point or another to give them some nice screen time, but it kept a central story, and it weaved together the other stories that you might see in a serialized Star Trek, which was expertly crafted and expertly executed. But more than that, I mean, beyond just the immediate gratification for a Star Trek fan or the immediate, let's call it season-wide story progression, this also had a really strong central theme, dealing with death. And as we know, part of the ongoing mission is to discover strange new worlds, new forms of life, so on and so forth. Well, they found sort of all of that right here. It's a strange new world, a completely different type of life that unfolds in a nebula that you would never have guessed ever that this form of life or this form of quote-unquote world existed, and it exists in a plane that we don't quite understand, which is fantastic sci-fi. But they're dealing very acutely with essentially mass death, and they have to communicate with a being that they don't understand in a method they're not sure we're going to understand, and are actually inflicting not retaliatory death, but accidental retaliatory death. And they don't really want to do that either. So it's just this beautiful musing on how people deal. You know, you get Uhura's, how she dealt with the death of her parents and her family, and how she dealt with the death of Hemmer. And then you get this, how they deal with the communication of death and facing death and understanding death. But every character at some point or another has to face down the issue of death or life in a way. And that is where Jim Kirk shines in this episode. I mean, it's where Paul Wesley has truly stepped up into a level of Kirk that we see in the original series. He has this introspective like highbrow moment with Uhura where he's saying, look, you either fight the battle or you let death win. And that sort of metaphorical, archetypal viewpoint is very Jim Kirk, Captain
Yes,
Kirk.
it's a total Kirk thing. I love that.
It's
This is why I
such a
love this
Kirk thing.
podcast, everybody. This is why, because of all the. I mean, come on, Paramount. Are you? Oh,
Seriously.
I'm sorry. I didn't
Seriously.
mean to throw you off, but gosh darn it, that was so good.
No, you're good, man. I mean, it is such a Kirk moment, but we also get the foil to that, which is why I think this is just such beautiful writing too, and why it deserves so much praise to the writing staff and the producers and everyone, because the way they weave Kirk into the story, he's not a crew member, he's just a recurring sort of guest character, really, but we know it's all leading up to the original series, right? So we're seeing Kirk interacting with his brother and showing his sort of familial ambition. We're getting a lot of this sort of adolescent Kirk and developing Kirk. So there is a distinction between William Shatner Kirk and Paul Wesley Kirk, just in the nature of his youth, his station, his designation. They're setting him apart, but they're building him up in a really spectacular manner that's like, you see flashes of the Captain Kirk, whether it's actual Captain Kirk in an alternate timeline or reality, or like what Captain Kirk is going to be. Because that discussion with Uhura is exactly the kind of discussion you'd see, Captain Kirk having on an alien planet, with a race of aliens that's going through some sort of genocide. Like, look, you either let the evil win or you stand up and fight. That is such a Kirk thing. Such a Kirk thing. Even though you can see unfolding on his face in that scene, like the fact that he's really struggling with the same type of things just under a different guise, but he's trying to be the superior officer, the good friend. But like, it's not bravado. It's human. It's more human than a Captain Kirk might have been, but it comes across in the same manner. And it really makes this awesome bridge between the Kirk we now have and the Kirk we once knew. And that, in and of itself, is a theme around death. That's where La'an scene is so poignant, because, yeah, you get the romantic sort of nuance to it, but she's still processing the death of the Kirk that she loved, the death of Captain Kirk, which is such a huge trope for Star Trek, right? But she's dealing with that, and it gets down, like you said, not a second wasted of screen time. It's superbly acted. The facial expressions convey this central theme in every single shot, every single acting technique, every line delivered kind of hits in a way that, like, I hate to say it, but the limited 10-episode season, I mean, it just behooves that you get this cast that can uniquely deliver such potency in such a short amount of time with such, grandiose characters that they're trying to play. I mean, for Christ's sake, it's Captain frickin' Kirk. Like, to condense that personality into a few sequences and convey such character dynamic is just out of this world.
Ha!
Hello.
Hey!
See what you did there. Yes.
So, I agree very much with Lucas here. It starts with this foundational writing where you are achieving such nuance, and I don't think we see other shows get there. Even Picard, to all its glory, really doesn't hit that sort of foundational nuance. It kind of brings you along as the actors tell the story. This actually immerses you inside the story. Both are very enjoyable conveyances of the screen, small or large, but man, are they different, and they certainly hit differently in both very good ways.
I used the adjective nimble at the top of the show. I want to add one. I feel that an episode like this, when it hits the viewer the way that it hit us and hopefully hit others, I see it as confident, because these guys, as to Lord Uther's point, they're very aware, even though we don't know, what the whole picture looks like. And so when you're not sort of throwing darts against the wall, we enjoyed Picard in its 3 seasons, but I think we might all at least concur that there might have been moments where all of a sudden it just felt like there were things happening and they were happening, right? I mean, that it was like, oh, well, wow, we got a bunch of cool stuff in this episode. And then on the next episode, we're going to do a bunch of more cool stuff. But I just feel like, sometimes you're looking at trees and not forests. I think that these guys are confident. They have surveyed the geography of what story they're trying to tell. And when you know exactly where you have to stick the landing and where you have to be, the train to arrive on time, then it's just a matter of filling in those, little peripheral details and things and rich character moments and so forth, so that you feel like, the journey was worth the trip that you took. And so, like I said, this show, above, let's say, some of the other Trek streaming shows, that have come before it, and even some, current shows. I just started watching the Justified revival with Timothy Oliphant. It dropped this week on FX and Hulu, and they've got 6 or 8 episodes to tell their story. But even from the first episode of this new reincarnation of this classic Elmore Leonard character, it felt a little scattershot, right? It felt like we're trying to put all this stuff into 46 minutes, and by the time the second episode dropped later that evening, they calmed down. It's like they took a deep breath and were like, okay, well, this is the story we want to tell, and so we're going to kind of hone in on it. I haven't felt that here with Strange New Worlds. And I think it's episodes like Lost in Translation that, like I say, these guys, they did all their homework early, and now they're just kicking their feet up on the desk saying, just wait till you see what we bring you next. And I think that's what rewards us as viewers. I want to really quick with Sam and Jim. It's a funny sibling rivalry, right? Because the obvious and elevator pitch to it is, well, one is jealous of the other and so forth, and they've always, you've always, taken the attention away from me, kind of a thing. And this one is much more subtler than that, in how Sam sort of says to him, boy, you're being really ambitious, and brings in, their father, George, who, again, because I've watched the Kelvin films, I thought George was a good-looking Chris Hemsworth who died, thanks to Eric Bana, but apparently he's alive and well in this current timeline. He still served on the Kelvin, so I'm just not going to try to untie those knots. I'm not quite sure how all that works, but I love that. Like I say, as I'm watching them as brothers, I believe that they're brothers, but it wasn't just a third grade. The usual bratty siblings that they don't get along and so forth. There's a little bit more texture there. And I also love that it was Sam's actual role for being on the ship, xenobiology or whatever his station is, that plays a major part in resolving, the mystery surrounding Uhura. Like, they kind of took what had seemingly just been, something tossed aside. Oh, Sam's on the ship and he's studying alien cultures, to actually being like, well, that's going to come in handy here, because then the three of them are workshopping and coming up with ideas. And granted, you're trying to communicate exposition. It's one of the hardest things to do organically as a writer, but it feels organic and authentic in that context. All of a sudden, you don't feel like, oh, great, someone's going to whip out a tricorder and be like, I've discovered the solution to the equation. Like, this one felt a little more thought out, even though it gets us to the same, script dynamics of we better tell the audience what's going on. It felt more appropriately added to the recipe rather than just like something extraneous and, quickly while we're walking down the hall, give me the rundown on, look at your tablet and tell me what's going on. So I enjoyed that scene a lot. I wanted more Spock chiding him on his messiness, because they did play that in the previously on. Yeah. That was like reminding the audience of Sam Kirk, but I wanted more of that. I wanted Spock to like come over to the bar and say like, would you clean that up, please? Like, that would have been So
You,
it wouldn't have
you know,
fit, but I wanted more of that. Neat
the
Spock.
just the overall vision of this show. Even when the special effects, which were, I mean, yeah, there were some this episode, but time not beautiful, just beautiful. I don't know if you've noticed. I feel like there's a lot of Nebula things going on to kind of show off the special effects that they can do with how, all the different colors and the ship kind of flying through and pulling some of the gas or the particles with them. But they tend to do that a lot in Stranger Worlds. But I think it looks fantastic. But I noticed that when Uhura was sitting at her station, they even have some of like the bubble type knobs from the original series, and I feel like that's intentional. I mean, again, I think it just goes back to not just the great writing, but the care of the show. Like, you have people, and we've talked about this before, right? I think you have people that are just vested in the show, which is what I think made Picard season 3 so great, because we've talked about that too. I could have season 1 and 2, 1 and 2 for Picard. Yes, it was nice, but Picard season 3 was just lights out. But I think a lot of that also had to do with attention to detail. And that's something that this show just consistently brings, even when, and I know I'm jumping ahead to something we're probably going to wind up talking about. If you looked at the way that Kirk shook Spock's hand, it was very Kirkish. I think Paul Wesley was watching Shatner, because Shatner would shake hands with his elbow in towards his body. And that's how he would extend his hand, and that's what he did in this episode. That's how he shook Spock's hand. And just seeing that, too, it's like, who sat there and said, hey, when you go to shake Ethan Peck's hand, your elbow should be right here? Or was that the actor that put the time in to watch and take those little nuanced things with him? That's just how incredible the show is. Just little things like that.
Yeah, certainly the little touches on this show are outstanding. The same reason why Paul Wesley makes a great Captain Kirk is the same reason why Val Kilmer is the best Batman. It's the little things about the character acting that just make it so incredible.
Let's talk about that last scene, Urza. I wanted you to take us because that was a humdinger.
Which one? What?
The last scene, the last sequence in this episode, bringing old friends and new friends to table.
Yeah, I really enjoyed seeing. I mean, it's top to bottom. I enjoyed seeing all of that, but I don't know. It did leave me wanting more. I have to say, it was like, oh, come on, can we see just a little more Spock and Kirk? Even a few seconds, really. But that, it felt a little overdue, but there was also something that it dawned on me as that scene actually closed, is like, is this the last time we see the Kirk brothers interacting? Because, as we all know, Kirk's brother, after he becomes captain in the original series, meets his untimely fate. Again, getting back to our central theme in this episode of death, and that sort of brotherly conflict, which nearly boils over at a couple of points. Again, showing how green Kirk is, and maybe a little bit of his bravado, his swagger comes through, which is all well and good, but it also kind of makes you a little sad, because it's like, when is the last time he sees his brother? It's one of those Picard moments, too, where it's like, when's the last time he sees Renee? When is the last time he sees Chateau Picard? And that's, kind of where the emotional punch of Star Trek is interwoven in the core story, and I think it gets back to Uther's point, is like the deep, abiding care, love, and respect that this crew, this cast, these writers, these producers and directors are putting into this show. That's where you get moments like Spock, Uhura, and Kirk sitting at the table at the end of the episode, and you see them interacting in a way where they're closer to equals than they are in the original series, but it also kind of gives you a little hinty hint at, like, you know, this might be why it was so easy for Kirk to plant a big smooch on Uhura. You know, there's a little bit of sparks flying between them. Not necessarily in an overt way, but they built a relationship here. It was a close one. It was intimate. I mean, Kirk was there for it at a time of desperate need. Those feelings don't typically go away, whether they're truly romantic or just, you know, opening the door to a deeper connection. The TLC, they've shown source material and canon and woven it into these, you know, nouveau storylines is just incredible. So for me, that closing sequence, while it left me wanting, it also gave me this weird perspective, which I think this whole episode gives you perspective on. I mean, when you see Hemmer giving that, you know, non-zombie nod and that sort of feeling of peace, that sweet release, not of death, but of triumph over death, in a sense and in a way, like freeing Uhura in that same moment. I mean, the nuance. It's like being a part of a symphony on the screen. Like, just, again, I think we get back to the incredible writing. I mean, I hate to keep harping on the same point, but every single episode, it's like a progression into the deeper and deeper genius of Star Trek writing. And, I mean, there's certainly weak Star Treks. But even if we look back at like a Star Trek V, which I think we've all agreed was the weakest of the original series movies, outside of maybe the original motion picture, even that, when faced with what we have for canon to date, looking back, you know, it's been sort of honored. It's been glorified. It's been given greater depth. And you gain, as I provided to Lord Uther, a little bit more perspective and respect for what you may have been like, "Bah," when you first saw it. Will the Gungans ever get that? I don't know. But that's really the big takeaway I got from this episode, is just that the treatment of the source material is just exemplary.
I have a question for both of you. Do you... where was I going? Oh, do you... Oh my gosh, it just slipped my mind. I had a... Welcome to not pod racing, welcome to podcasting.
Now this is podcasting, Rick Perry.
Yes, this is podcasting.
All right, while you're gathering your thoughts, I think we deserve to shout out to Celia Rose Gooding for Uhura, because once again, you know, Nichelle Nichols obviously is the gold standard for this role, and how she played it throughout. And we got the Zoe Saldana interpretation in the Kelvin timeline. But here is an Uhura who, like, is comfortable being insecure. At least, you know, she doesn't allow that to detract from the mission or so forth. And she's gaining confidence with each new episode and each new challenge. And as you know, I think all of the female characters, the regular crew members, Ortegas, Una, Chapel, Uhura, Lon, I think they've all been shown their best selves on this show. I think we've seen a lot of their facets and their multidimensionality, their flaws, their strengths. And I think that the casting directors and so forth deserve credit, and the actresses who bring these characters to life. And I think right from the get-go, because I believe Uhura, we had a focus on her and the singing aliens, using song as a language in episode 2 of the first season. She's just, you can't take your eyes off her, even if she's just saying, you know, Captain, we have an incoming transmission from Admiral Nagora, you know, on screen, you know, like, she even manages to captivate you in that exchange, and that might be the only time you check in with her on the episode. So I think Miss Rose Gooding is clearly, much like Ethan Peck has done Spock, she's taken an iconic role, and she's already made me appreciate what she's brought to it. You know, if it still takes me a couple of episodes to get to Kirk, fine. And Pike has been, you know, somewhat chameleon-like throughout, so Anson Mount has been more than capable of putting his personal stamp on it. But again, when you're talking about, and we're going to say the same thing when Montgomery Scott and Bones McCoy and Sulu and everybody else shows up, when you have in you're fixed in your mind what these characters sound like, move, breathe, behave, and somebody else can come in and show you something different, something that adds and gives more layers to the onion. Well, that's great homework and great research by the performer, as well as how they're carrying it off there. And I think to what Uther was saying about who showed Kirk how to handshake. When the actor brags that he did all that research, those are the ones you want to punch in the nose, generally speaking. But yes, you appreciate ones who are diligent in their craft and probably watched all the episodes of the original series and then froze, wait, he's shaking hands, what's it look like? And then taking notes. You appreciate that. You just don't want to hear about it like, at the red carpet premiere. Like, those are the guys you're like, oh, come on. So, way too method.
I got my question.
There you
I
go. We
remember.
found it. Okay.
Okay, sorry, my bad. Do you think the mention, Kirk, the Kirk brothers are talking.
The Kirks.
They talk about their dad. He's obviously still alive. Do you think this is intentional so that way everyone knows this is not another offshoot of a timeline? It's not the Kelvin timeline. Do you think that's intentional, or do you think it was just talk to set up the whole thing of, I'm fulfilling Dad's expectations and you kind of are? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I think sometimes we as the outside observers who aren't in the room, I think we might ascertain more nefarious motives or things to the writers are thinking about. I think the discussion of their dad works in this episode to help give us the boundaries of what their relationship is, and I don't think that there was ever any real consideration that this was somehow we better make sure, because I mean, if you're going by the Kelvin timeline and we're not, I mean, George dies sacrificing himself, on the Kelvin, and his wife,
there would be
his infant son, and then Kirk grows up in Iowa, an angry teenage boy who gets into bar fights. So I know that Kurtzman, he wrote that Star Trek, and he wrote those Star Trek movies that we dare not speak their names, at least for now. And I know he's aware of it, and I don't think they're going out of their way to thumb their nose at stuff that they, were personally invested in as writers, 15 years ago. But I think just for the sake of how do we explain this complicated sibling relationship, whatever, I think that's probably where they were leaning more towards than, I mean, I'll admit as a viewer, I was scratching my head because I'm like, wait a minute. Sam is actually named George, but he goes by Sam, and George is still alive, but they keep mentioning that he served on the Kelvin. So what are they trying to tell me? And it might just all be a crisscross thing of yarn on a bulletin board, that I'm trying to prove some conspiracy theory. And I don't want to be that guy. So I'm just going to go with it and hopefully, we don't stray too far into the nether worlds there. Ursa might have a different take on it, but I think it just establishes their relationship as a family dynamic.
I do have a different take.
Okay.
Slightly. I do think that in this episode, the function of that is exactly what you said. It's to set up that family dynamic and to be economical with the words and the screen time. I also think that everything is intentional. You have to be this controlled with everything you're putting on screen and everything the actors are saying. I fully believe that that is somehow going to come into play at some point. That being said, I don't know that there are immediate plans to utilize that in some fashion, but I think the best writers always plant seeds for the future, especially when you have a recurring series. So, I think of it like as a Tom Bombadil moment.
Nice.
So, and the reason I bring up Tom Bombadil specifically is that was a character that certainly could have played a future role in future stories to be told in Middle-earth. George Kirk certainly could be utilized in a major future role in future Strange New Worlds, but not necessarily need to be, utilized. It's one of those things that it's there. They can use it if they need it or if they want to. It's not material either. Now, shifting gears a little bit, I think what is material and what was used perfectly for the economy of the screen time and the budget, frankly, that they have for this series, the Una Chin Riley and Chief Engineer Pelia back and forth was just a masterclass in acting. The tension conveyed in those sequences was palpable. It was almost a sexual tension. It was so palpable. And I don't mean that in a cheeky way. I mean,
Right.
like, it was just
Right.
the intensity of which was titillating. You thought it might come to blows or they might hug it out at the end. It was
Well,
almost
and you have
mother to
these,
daughter.
yeah, you have these two sort of, I mean, you have one who's obviously got the decades, centuries of experience, but she's very lax on the rules. And then you've got Una who, like, you better wipe that countertop down. I see the dust from over here. And so, I mean, it's just a great sort of, authority figures, if you will. I mean, I don't think Pelia sort of, I mean, she was an instructor and she still, kind of takes that student teacher mentor relationship quite seriously. But it's like, I thought it was fascinating. And I even thought, I guess Carol Kane playing Pelia is very short because, I mean, Una's towering over her in some of those two shots. Like, and like a noticeable difference. Like Pelia looks small, hobbit-sized compared to Rebecca Romaine, who's, like there. And I believe, I think that I think Ursa's right on there. That was very fun. I'm still getting used to Carol Kane's accent, but I thought that,
She's totally making that up, by the way.
right. I mean, she's just winging it, but it's
not
just
even a real actor, right?
It's incredible, though. And,
It
that's
is.
what I love most about it, and maybe I'm a dirty old man, but it felt very like Dom versus Dom. Like two dogs fighting for the alpha authority, but like in a... and the thing that I love about this show is everybody's absolutely gorgeous and beautiful, and they don't play up the sexuality of the show. I mean, there's a lot of like implication and subtext, and you get romance, but you don't get, like, a lot of shows I think really lean heavy into overt, graphic, type interaction of that nature. But this almost felt like a subtle, like, you're sort of the alpha mommy on the ship, but I've been the alpha mommy for thousands of years, kind of thing. And it's you get that size difference, and it's like, wow, this is. I mean, it's engaging to say the least in a nuanced way, but it plays out in such a way that it kind of like it gives you their best features as actors. Like, they lay into kind of the because I think they've both been sort of espoused to sort of sexy roles in the past, and this is very sort of stiff upper lip for Una and sort of like plucky maybe for Carol Kane, and it's like an interesting sort of dynamic that plays on the, like, I think you kind of would expect from both of them some sort of a nuanced sexuality to their character, which you're just not getting. I'm still thinking we might see a Captain Pike Una Chin Riley romance at some point. I would love to see it. But then there's like this sort of quirky romantic flirtation with Pelia and like literally everybody on the ship, it seems like. And I'm just like, how much fun are they having in this moment? That they not only are showing off their like platinum edged acting chops, but they're also being like real sort of cheeky and like tongue in cheek cheeky in this, where it's like are they playing up on like the subtextual like dominance struggle here? Because I gotta admit that's intriguing as a viewer, and it's not just like, I'm your superior officer, well, I'm the chief engineer, you can't run the ship without me. I mean, there's some of that, but like there's a little bit of like, hey, this is my turf, it's a pissing contest.
Yeah.
it is a beautiful pissing contest that plays out in like what 2 minutes of a 56-minute episode. I'm like, holy shit, this is layered. Like these are characters that, like, again, it's writing, but it's also just the impressive acting chops of two unbelievably talented actors who I think often are relegated to kind of just these sort of flat roles where they lean into whatever the script calls for. But this is something where it's like, have fun with this, because you've got 2.5 minutes, do whatever you want, but bring tension. And they bring it in like 8 different ways, and I'm just like, as if you were blown away. So maybe that's my own personal kink showing off.
No, I see it.
They're definitely trying to establish, again, that idea of dominance or who knows more, or, following the rules, the regulations, in a sense. Historical question, and then we can obviously go to our ratings for this week. Am I correct that Khan is floating out there right now somewhere? Is this correct? He was banished from Earth centuries ago, even at this point, and he's floating around.
Couple centuries, yep.
Okay, so Lon is just a niece of, just part of the family lineage?
I think it was Khan her grandfather, I want to say?
It could be, yeah. Okay.
I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly, but a relative of some kind, a fairly direct relative.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that he is still floating around out there. For some reason, my mind's having a hard time wrapping itself around this idea that Lon is...
Which is one of the questions that I think keeps coming up in the back of my head every episode she's in, is like, what are they going to do with her? Because she's not around in the original series, so it's like, is she one of the casualties in this conflagration that Captain Pike is headed towards no matter what he does? Or is there some other angle they're working that maybe has an influence on another series that's canon? Next Generation, I'm hoping. So anyhow, I do think it is time. We've gushed and gushed and gushed in more ways than one about episode 6 of Strange New Worlds. This may not be the most surprising Warp Core ratings segment that we've done to date, but let's lay it out there. This week we'll kick it off with Lord Uther. Give us your rating out of 7 Warp Cores. How you felt about episode 6, Strange New Worlds, season 2.
Well, I'm going to redirect power from life support, shields, phasers, environmental controls, and I'm going to put it completely into the Warp Core so we can go past Warp 9.9. I'm giving this 7.5 out of 7 Warp Cores. I've got to go beyond my 7, and I never thought I would do that, but I think this is not only is this an incredible story in and of itself, even if you just watched it without it, it's setting up future things that we're going to see, right? It picked up all those breadcrumbs that were left behind. It's masterful writing. It's masterful acting. I think it's a pivotal. I think this might be a pivotal episode.
Easy for you.
That's going to lead us somewhere. So I gotta go 7.5. I mean, one more thing before I turn it over to Lucas. Urza, we've talked before on a previous podcast about sometimes magic just happens, like during these acoustic sessions of MTV Unplugged, or like a Foo Fighters live, right? Like it's just somehow it's magic. Eric Clapton live, like Unplugged, it's magical. Something happens. I think we're seeing a magical series before our eyes. Even Twin Peaks, which I love with all of my heart, because Lucas got me started with that. It used to be my favorite of favorite shows. Strange New Worlds is making a push for number 1 with me, because there's not been one truly weak episode. It's been that good. Lucas?
I want to use a quick baseball analogy. Imagine the San Francisco Giants send up to the plate J.D. Davis, and he swats a first inning home run into left field. And the very next batter, Mike Yastrzemski, comes up, and he too hits a home run after working a count 3-2 for back-to-back jacks to give the Giants an early 2-run lead in the top of the first. That's what we have with these last two episodes, Charades and Lost in Translation. We have back-to-back home runs coming at a point where you might expect the show to maybe dip a little sag in the middle as they ramp up for the big, finale and everything leading up to it. But instead of getting lazy or drifting off course, these middle episodes, 5 and 6, taken together as a whole and individually, are just rock solid. As we said, I based on how they've demonstrated it, I'm down for any Uhura heavy forward episode going forward. Like, I'll just know if I know it's an Uhura episode, I'll just instinctively think, oh, this is going to be a good one. So, and that's a credit to Celia Rose Gooding and everybody behind her. So yeah, 7 out of 7. Once again, high praise from this command perch.
Love it. I really wanted to try to not break the 7 warp core limit, but like Lord Uther, like I said the last episode, this is a perfect episode of television. But this one goes a step beyond charades, which I didn't know was possible until I saw this episode. And I swear I'm thinking with the brain up here and not any other brain that may or may not be metaphorically on my person. But this whole episode just had me absolutely thrilled from head to toe. Rebecca Romaine and Carol Kane had a lot to do with that because I was obsessed with their interaction in this episode. And that was like the 5th obsession I had in this episode overall. So I would divert all power, including life support, to the warp core on this, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 7. I am rounding the sun and traveling back in time to let myself know, hey, you should probably lower all your other ratings because you're about to be blown away in about 24 episodes into the Warp Core podcast. And wow, episode 25, you could not have asked for a better Star Trek episode to feature. It, from beginning to end, even with the commercials that Paramount Plus, shoehorns in there that you have to watch, which I don't even mind at this point because everything I've seen on their platform has been ridiculously fantastic, to be honest with you. But especially Strange New Worlds deserves every accolade a streaming show can garner because, my goodness, this is just incredible. And huge compliments to cast, crew, writers, everybody. But especially to the crew of the USS Enterprise and to Jim Kirk in this episode. I got to admit, like, even the legacy characters who have been recast for this show that aren't the TOS characters, because that would be just nonsense, they're starting to replace them when I think of Star Trek. Uhura is now, Celia. She's Uhura to me. Nothing against Nichelle Nichols. I love her to death. I had a crush on her when I was a kid. I thought she was cute. And I think the first Star Trek movie I saw was Star Trek 4, so she's a little old for me at the time. But let's be honest, like, we loved these original series cast members, and these characters in Strange New Worlds that are assuming those roles are really starting to establish themselves as the new standard for Star Trek. For any series that's produced after this show, the bar has been set so impossibly high. I think we're entering a new golden age of Star Trek. I have to say, I am cautious though, because I know coming down the pipe is a crossover episode. And while I look forward to it because I think it could be really great, I also think of other shows that have done crossover episodes where I was not super impressed. Even if I really enjoyed myself, it felt like a bit of a toss away. Supernatural Scooby-Doo episode. But I won't be that disappointed, but it may garner one of the lower Warp Core ratings. I'm trying not to go unbiased, but crossover episodes and me don't always get along.
Am I the only
Come on,
one not
Frasier.
familiar with Lower Decks, or I mean, are you guys versed
I've
in
not watched Lower Decks.
I haven't either. And now
So
you
we-
can't
So-
watch it anyway, Paramount.
No.
Ah.
I think you still can though. That one you,
You still
can't.
can watch Lower Decks. That
But-
one you can.
I feel like we
Well,
should just go in cold, because that way, if it doesn't work for whatever reason for us, like I don't know. I feel like instead of being well versed in it, maybe it needs to reach viewers like us who aren't familiar with that setup, or I don't know.
I was just gonna say that it might actually benefit us, which is why I haven't like rushed to go out and watch Lower Decks. I will say that the Star Trek series, I forget what it was that was pulled off.
Prodigy.
Prodigy is available on physical media.
Okay.
It was discounted on Amazon Prime Day. I almost picked it up, but I honestly hadn't heard anything real great about it, so I was like,
Well,
So
I think the next
with that,
episode- oh, go ahead. My bad.
oh no, please, Lord Uther.
My prediction is the next episode is going to be a comic relief type of episode. I think they're going comedy.
I think so too. I think it's gonna be the crossover episode because you dealt with some pretty heavy subjects in episode 6. Death is always tough, to be honest. No matter how you're tackling it, it makes for very difficult writing. They knocked it out of the freaking universe with this one. So the bar needs to be reset. They need to give us a little bit of plucky comedy. Maybe some goofball situations. Maybe Spock spills something on his shirt. Who knows? I mean, that would be just wonderful. Honestly, it would be. That scene alone could
could
like
actually
steal
kill
the
it.
whole show.
Yeah.
That would just kill.
I have
but
to change my uniform.
that line delivered by Ethan Peck would be absolutely hysterical. I'm loving this show, you guys. I'm loving it. And 25 episodes into the Warp Core podcast, we, myself, Lord Uther, Lucas Bly, all hope that you continue to love our podcast if you haven't already. And I hate to be a beggar, but please hit that subscribe button if you're here on YouTube, or if you're listening to us on any of the podcast audio platforms, which we are available on all of them. Please hit that follow button, subscribe button, or whatever your platform uses. We want to keep reaching you as often as possible. We want to keep releasing these episodes as timely as we can to keep up, but understand that we are just a small bird leaving the nest and want to continue delivering content. The way you can do that is by sharing us with your friends, having them subscribe, and when we start hitting that milestone marker, 500 subs, 1,000 subs, and more, we definitely will have some great things in store from you from the Warp Core podcast and our other pending rebrand partners. I am UrzaMaster. That is Lord Uther. That is Lucas Bly. From the bottom of our hearts, we leave you with live long and prosper.